All right, guys, we're going to move on today to chapter 6. Give a PowerPoint up here. I've had a few problems with my PowerPoints lately, so I'm just going to ask you to be a little patient with me. I'm hoping that we don't have the same problems. Okay, so let's think of where we came from and where we're going. When we started all this, we started with, once we got past the initial history, we started with the police, right? We talked about what they could do, couldn't do, certain cases that told them what they could and couldn't do. So we got the police who arrested their fella, and then we learned how the case goes over to the district attorney. The district attorney then brings it to court. We learned about all our players in court. We learned how a trial works. And at the end of that, we turned it over to the jury who came back with their verdict. So we're picking up from there and assuming that our jury found our defendant guilty. Now we've got to decide what's going to be the penalty on that person. And that's what we're looking at today is sentencing. Someone who's been convicted of a crime, and now we have to decide the sentence. It is one of the most difficult decisions made by, in our jurisdiction, made by a judge. In Louisiana, the judge does the sentencing. I know that in some jurisdictions, the jury decides, especially whether it's going to be life or death. But in Louisiana, I think you're going to find judges are involved in the sentencing. It affects the fate of the defendant. And also, there are a number of goals that we want to achieve by sentencing. So let's first of all look at the goals that we want to achieve. First, and look, all of these goals are wound up into this. This is not one or the other. The first one, obviously, is retribution. We need somebody to pay for what he's done, right? It's taking revenge on the perpetrator. He's receiving punishment that the system sees as deserved, justified, and required. You will see it sometimes referred to as the just desserts model of sentencing, meaning he gets what he gave. He deserves this. We want to punish him for it. And that's obviously the first goal and the most obvious goal of the sentencing. Some people consider incapacitation as an important goal of sentencing. Incapacitation meaning we need these people separated from society. We need them locked up so that they cannot commit other crimes. Just get them off the street, keep them in jail. We have incapacitated them from being able to commit further crimes by keeping them locked up. Deterrence is sometimes used as an argument for why a certain sentence should be imposed for a defendant for the crime that he's committed. Deterrence meaning you want to discourage additional criminal behavior because of this punishment. In other words, oh, I'm not going to commit that crime because that's what's going to happen to me if I get caught. Two types of deterrence really specific, which means on this specific offender. In other words, we need his sentence to be serious enough that he doesn't want to go out and commit this crime again because he doesn't want this punishment again. But we're talking about as to him, this particular defendant. That's specific deterrence. On the other hand, some people think that the sentence that you give to this defendant affects the other people out there who might think about committing that crime, and they look at what happened to him and say, "Oh, I'm not going down that road. Look what they did to this guy." That's general deterrence, meaning the focus is on other people other than this particular defendant. Rehabilitation. Um, a lot of people believe that criminals can be cured of their criminality, that we can reform them. That might involve education. It might involve getting them some sort of psychological treatment that they need, but they can be made improved while they're in jail so that they can be returned to society and function as a normal person of society without committing crimes. Um, most people who go into jail are going to come back out. Most people are not in for life. So the argument for the people who think rehabilitation should be one of the primary goals is, don't we want him better when he comes back out to be among us again, let's do whatever we can for him while he's in, because that's only going to benefit us when he gets out. And lastly, restoration. Restoration is trying to make the victim whole again, basically, and society. Hard to make society whole again. Normally, this just means we're going to give um, equal consideration to what the victim needs as to what the offender, is held accountable for. Okay, those are the 5 goals of sentencing. But now let's look at the particular practices. How is this going to be carried out? Um, indeterminate sentencing. Indeterminate sentencing it's a sentencing model that encourages rehabilitation because it uses general and unspecific sentences. I never understood this one before I was got into law, because I'd watch my whodunits even before then. And I'd see a judge or watch the news even and see the crime, whatever criminal was being sentenced on the news that night. And the judge would say, I'm going to sentence you to 1 to 10 years. What does that mean, 1 to 10 years? Well, what it means is that, your upper and lower limits, I'm giving you those. But which one applies to you is going to depend on what you choose to do with yourself while you're in jail. And it assumes that offenders are much more likely to participate in these rehabilitation programs if it reduces the amount of time they have to spend in prison, right? So it's leaving a lot of leeway for a judge to make this upper and lower limit. But the inmate's behavior is the primary determinant of exactly how much time is going to be served. It's got some problems. People who complain about it say it's not fair. It's inequitable because um, different different people may do the same crime and have completely different sentences. And the things that you're using to determine whether I get the upper or the lower limit or wherever you're going to fall on this scale may be based more on personality, social characteristics. Um, heaven forbid it be based on the color of skin, or maybe the way somebody talks, or the way that they act. There are just so many different things that are going to be used to decide whether he falls closer to the upper limit or the lower limit. And another big complaint about it is that it's really dishonest if you look at it from the point of the victim or the victim's family. They've gotten the perpetrator to trial and found guilty, and now the judge says, "Oh, I'm going to sentence you to 5 to 10 years." Do you think that means that guy's going to actually be in prison for 5 to 10 years? Probably not. Remember, in prison, they have all different types of good time or gain time. If you behave, if you take classes, even online classes don't get to go take a tour of our local jail with me. When I teach in person, we go actually take a tour of our local jail, and they'll show us a classroom, and it's like, well, this is where they can come try to get their GED, and that knocks a certain amount of time off their sentence. Some of them can come take parenting classes, and that knocks some more time off their sentence. So when you start throwing in all these good time, gain times, other allowances are calculated in, they're not even going to do 5 years. They're not even going to do the minimum, perhaps. In other words, it could work out that way. So when you sat in that courtroom and you sentenced him to 5 to 10 years, that was not honest. So that's just another criticism of that type of sentencing. So in another um, practice is when judges are given sentencing guidelines. So there's different types of sentencing guidelines, but with all of them, the judge is looking for aggravating circumstances or mitigating circumstances. Now, aggravating, most of us know what that word means. You're making it worse, right? That's circumstances around this particular defendant's crime that appear to make it more grave, more heinous than the average instance of that crime. And of course, in that instance, we're gonna want it to be a tougher sentence. Some of the examples of aggravating circumstances might be that he was armed, with a weapon. That's simple enough to be an aggravating circumstance. That it was especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel. Perhaps, a lot of y'all are police officers and you know what I mean when it's, the victim was beaten, especially violently, over and above kind of type thing. They kind of went um, to the other extreme as far as torturing, before they killed the person. It might be that the defendant induced others to participate in the commission of the crime. So he was the leader of the pack and he was the one that convinced everybody else to come in and do the crime with him, as opposed to perhaps the one that just got sucked into doing it wasn't the leader. So those are aggravating circumstances. Judge is going to lean towards, a tougher sentence there. On the other hand, perhaps the judge finds mitigating circumstances. And mitigating circumstances, those are things that make it less. When we mitigate damages, we try to lessen the damages. And these are going to be considered to reduce the sentence, maybe a lesser sentence on that defendant. And examples of that might be he doesn't have a record. He's never committed a crime before. He wasn't the one who planned it, who led it. He just got sucked into this. He has a good reputation in the community. He helped in the apprehension of perhaps some of the others. Once he got caught, he helped in turning over information used to solve the crime to catch all the other ones. Those are mitigating circumstances. So those things would lessen a sentence. Okay, I think I'm having a little PowerPoint problem, so give me just a minute here. Okay, let me try to get started again here. Three strikes laws. This is, let me see if I can get us back on our slideshow here, y'all. Okay, so three strikes laws came about because people at one point got fed up with apparently the same people. They going in and they getting out and they commit another crime, and they go in and they get out and they commit another crime. So in 1994, California um, got involved in putting a three strikes law in place. And since then, most other states have followed suit. In Louisiana, we do have a law called the habitual offender law. Again, it mandates more severe sentence for offenders convicted of three serious felonies. The problem is that when it first started, it didn't focus on those three serious felonies. And so people might be getting arrested for the third time, but their third arrest was for something really minor. But because it fell within the definition under the three strikes law, they were getting these huge sentences, because he stole the CD, that kind of thing. So the effectiveness got questioned a lot, and our prison population was going up, and we hit an economic crisis in the early 2000s, and it just wasn't working. So there were many changes made. In California, and this YouTube video talks about the gentleman who kind of led the charge on this. His daughter was murdered by someone who already had convictions. And so he's the one that kind of somehow, he wasn't a politician or anything. He just got caught up in um, he got caught up. Where's my Zoom? Here I am. I'm sorry. He got caught up in the fact that his daughter shouldn't have died because that gentleman should have been in prison kind of thing. And so he all of a sudden became an advocate for it, got it pushed. It had several different things in it. It required a sentence of 25 years to life for three-time convicted felons. Parole, and again, we're going to learn about parole in particular next week. Parole consideration, you couldn't even be considered to get out on parole unless you had served 80% of your sentence. As I said, many states have passed a law like this, and we do have a law like this. Um, y'all, my my YouTube, there's a YouTube on the PowerPoint on the previous slide. I've been going in and out. I've probably made y'all dizzy so far. But there is a YouTube that goes over the whole story of the three strikes laws and how it came to be and how they had to go in and make adjustments to it. So it's pretty interesting. And I think most people would agree that, look, you're giving them a chance, you're giving them another chance, you're giving them another chance. I think what people would agree, though, is that third strike that's going to put them away for a long time, it needs to be a serious strike. It can't be something minor. So that's what I think you'll see the focus on. Okay, another practice that's there also is mandatory sentencing. And mandatory sentencing means, look, the legislature, when they write the law and they pass it, they are telling you exactly what the sentence has to be. It is not discretionary for the judge. The three strikes laws fell under this. In other words, it would say from when the legislators wrote the law, and it would say if he's found guilty of X, his sentence is Y. And with three strikes, if he is found guilty of his third felony, then you got to do this. So it's mandatory sentencing. There's no leeway in the nature of the sentence. The judge's hands are tied. That is called mandatory sentencing. Now, that ran us into some problems too, because again, our prison population went way up because legislators are politicians, right? Politicians want to get out there and run on the "we're tough on crime" platform. And when they have to prove that they're tough on crime, one of the things they like to do is show, I'm going to make sure if somebody did this, then they're going to stay in jail. They're going to have to do this much time in jail. So our crime rates, even though they began decreasing in the 1990s, prison populations were increasing. And what happens when your prison populations are increasing? It costs a lot of money. It's a huge financial burden to run, state prisons, all our local prisons, federal prisons. There is a documentary that I watched on CNN one night. I think it was called American Jail. I have not been able to find it since then to watch it again. If you stumble across that, please send me an email and tell me where you found it, because this gentleman went back to his hometown. I think he was in Philadelphia, and followed some of the people that he knew growing up that ended up in jail. But he also dove into the whole prison industry and what it takes for us to run our prison industry. It is a bazillion dollar system that we have in place to do everything for the jails and the prisons that we have. And of course, his allegation is that it's a system that perpetuates itself, and that there's so many people who benefit monetarily from it that it'll never be changed, because we keep needing all these people to be sent to jail so that it keeps all this money flowing for the people who provide things to the jail. It's really, really interesting. American Jail, and it was on CNN, but I've never been able to find it again, and I've never seen it, offered again. Um, some innovations in sentencing. I mean, there are some judges. I think you'll usually see this in um, like really low level crimes, just petty crimes where you want to do something to the person, but this is not something you'd really put somebody in jail for any type of significant amount of time. Clearly, nonviolent crimes for sure. It's shaming is one thing that they'll use. They'll make you, I don't know if you've seen some of these stories, but they'll make somebody stand out there and hold a sign in front of a public place saying, I did so and so, The YouTube video on here, I think, it showcases a judge who, again, he's doing little petty crimes. The kid stole a bike, and yeah, he wanted to do something to him. The victim was there, and he's like, "Yeah, I want something. I mean, he's got to do something, but I don't want this to be on this kid's record forever. He just stole a bike." And he comes up with a little alternative sentence. And for all of them that come before him, he gives them the offer. Okay, you can go do 2 days in jail, or you can go do this. One of the ladies had left her dog in her just disgusting house, like a hoarder house, just left him, and no food, no water. And so she got arrested, and she shows up in court, and he offers her, you go do your, and I don't remember how much time, your couple of days in jail, or you can go out to the city dump and go work out there, because that's pretty much where you left your dog. And so she chose to go out to the dump, and it follows her out to the dump and the work that she has to do. It also tells us that the dog was rescued and has a good home now too. But anyway, pretty interesting. Just it's just innovation. It's just judges that are trying to come up with things other than jail. Home incarceration is actually, an alternative sentence as well. I mean, we have some people who wear the bracelets and all. Drug treatment. Some people don't get sent to jail. Maybe they get sent to treatment. Um, Community service, we've all heard of that. Go do community service. I mean, there's some variations of sentencing that you can try. Um, when the judge has to do the sentence, he's got to have a little bit of help in gathering the information. So most of the cases, you will see the judge order a pre-sentence investigation. It's a report that's put together by probation and parole to try to give the judge information that might be relevant to why you would want to sentence more or less kind of thing. It goes into all different types of things, and the investigating officer usually gets to make a recommendation as well. I think here we usually have them in writing. I've never seen one done verbally. I'm not in criminal court a lot anymore, but it was always just a report. And that's why sentencing wasn't done at the time. The jury would come back and say guilty. Sentencing is not usually done at that time because the judge doesn't have this report to decide the sentence. The judge then has to go back and study, and they schedule the sentencing, for another month or two down the road. Um, all right, hang on with me just a second again, because I think that I'm going to pause you for one more second. It skipped a slide again, so I'm sorry. I had to go back and try to open this back up one more time. Okay, in that pre-sentence report, um, here are some of the things that might be considered high risk that a judge is really looking for. Has the person shown these antisocial personality patterns? He hasn't been able to get along with people. He doesn't socialize with people. Is he pro-criminal? I've deserved this. I get that. And I hadn't done anything wrong. It's mine for the taking. Does he have any social supports for crime? Meaning, is that the way his family and friends are living too? Or that's that's the only support system he has, is they are pro-crime. I don't know how to say it, pro-crime also. Has there been a substance abuse problem? We all know substance abuse often ties in with crime. Are there family and marital problems? If he didn't have people who are going to help and support him through this, that's a strike that's not working in his favor. Has he never been able to perform in school, never held a job? And again, lack of involvement in pro-social activities. He can't get along with anybody. He's always in fights. Those are all high risk factors that for a judge, would tend to say maybe a little tougher sentence. He doesn't have a lot of things working in his favor that he's going to come out of this quickly and be able to come back into society. The victim, when we talked about the players in the courtroom, we referred to the victim and said, that victim is often forgotten. And that was because if you remember in your courtroom players and your diagram, the victim's not sitting up there, right? They're not an active player in this role. And so a lot of people think that they've been totally forgotten, and that's not really the case. You don't have to know these laws, but I just wanted to point out that all the way back to the 1970s, there have been some grassroots movements trying to focus on the poor treatment of victims by the system. There have been laws passed, statutes passed, trying to raise the concern for victims, adding victims' rights amendments. They've tried to add those to the U.S. Constitution. There have been, the Victim and Witness Protection Act, like in the 80s, the 90s. they have tried to treat the victim a little better and have more concern for the victim. And um, all states now have passed legislation which would allow for victims to be compensated if that fits. And again, victims' crime. Here we are in the 2000s and we're still passing laws. You don't have to know any of these laws. Just know that there has been an effort to not have the victim be forgotten. And interestingly, and I did not verify this, but I was told just the other day that our local district attorney, who used to have a victim's advocate, that person would come for the trial, kind of hold the hand of the family, get what they needed, you know, escort them where they needed to be. I was told we don't have that anymore. I don't know if that's true or not. But I know one of the ladies who used to do it was fantastic with it. I mean, she really spent every minute with that family during the trial, getting them what they needed. She just I thought she did an outstanding job from what I could see from the outside. And it's a shame if that's true. I don't know if it's true, but if it's true that we don't have that, that's a shame. We're probably all a little bit familiar with victim impact statements. They could be written, it could be in court. Most of the time, what you and I see, if you're watching the whodunits like I am, but even if you see some of the um, trials on TV and all, the victim impact statement, it's information that's the victim, or if there's no victim, if the victim was killed, family members, survivors who can come in and basically stand. This is after, I mean, this is sentencing, so he's already been found guilty, so he did the crime, and they can look him in the eye and tell him what his crime did to them, how it impacted their life, their family's life, the trauma that it caused. It's designed to give the judge the other side of the story, so to speak. Remember, they've gotten information about the defendant. This is designed to give them information from the victim side. Um, it says it's usually in writing. Most of the ones you and I see are people saying it on TV. I know do you remember when that the U.S. gymnast doctor guy got caught molesting all those poor little gymnasts, and they got him, and he found him guilty, and or he pled. I don't remember how, but anyway, he was guilty of the crimes, and each one of those little gymnasts came in and testified, saying, what he did to them, and that's always what I think of when I think of victim impact. It's the person standing there, so it can be oral. I don't know when it's written. I don't know who reads it if it's written. That's the only thing I'm not sure of. And there's some real questions about whether that really impacts the judge's sentencing decision. Um, I think the judge has probably reviewed most of his information and probably kind of already formed his opinion before this, but I could be wrong. I've never been in with a judge to discuss how he did this, um, the sentencing and considered the victim impact. So let's talk about modern sentencing options. So four traditional sanctions dominate, right? This is traditionally what is still most common. A fine, meaning money. Probation, meaning you're not going to jail, but um, there are going to be some conditions put on you, and unless you do meet those conditions, then you will go to jail. Imprisonment, which means you go to jail, and death. And of course, that's capital cases. And in some instances, these could be combined. There are many cases where you impose a fine and you impose probation or jail, and they have both things to take care of. So these are the traditional uh, options. So let's talk about these. Fines. The problem with fines is that there's built-in inequities. The inequity meaning that um, different people committing the same crime may not get the same fine. If they do get the same fine, it could be that those different people come from completely different financial situations. So the good side of fines is that if I stole the money, then I should be fined because I shouldn't benefit of the money, right? I need to give the money back. I need to not benefit from my theft. If I know that giving the money back is what's going to keep me out of jail and keep me on the straight and narrow, then maybe I'm more likely to, stay on the straight and narrow and give the money back. Um, it's not expensive. I don't need a whole courtroom of people to track down if the guy's paying his fines or not. So it's not like putting him in jail where we got to feed him and clothe him and give his medical care and everything. It can be adjusted proportionately, and that would address some of those concerns. What we don't want to have happen is that the rich people can buy their way out of things and the poor people can't. That's what we don't want to have happen. And that's kind of a problem with fines. Um, in Scandinavia, they came up with a system called the day fine system. And instead of putting a set amount of money, they do it based on what the person makes per day. So now they're looking at several things. They're looking at the seriousness of the offense. They're looking at the defendant's degree of culpability. How much was he to blame? Does he have a prior record? I mean, they're still considering all those factors, but they're going to do a number of days multiplied by the daily wages. So if they do a 5-day fine, well, if they do it, let's say on somebody who makes $200 a day, his 5-day fine would be $1,000, right? If they're doing it on somebody who's making $20 a day, his 5-day fine would be $100. But theoretically, it was 5 days of wages, so it impacted us equally. So that's just something to consider on fines. It's something that, another jurisdiction came up with to try to even out the fact that we just don't think that fines hit everybody equally. I'm an old woman who's been practicing law a long time, and if I got fined $1,000, I could come up with that. If perhaps you young, just started college, maybe you don't have a family to support you, you're trying to work and go to school, then maybe $1,000 would hit you a lot harder than it would hit me. And that's where the fine system gets questioned sometimes. All right, and of course, um, the death penalty is the big one. I did want to go back and mention, I talked about a minute ago. Don't forget there are alternative sanctions, and that's community service, home incarceration, drug treatment. There are a few other things that we didn't go into here that are kind of all alternative things that we see a lot. We see a lot of drug treatment. They'll go into treatment instead of going to jail. Okay, the death penalty. This is one of the hottest topics right now. And when I say right now, I am taping this lecture in March of 2025. Last week, Louisiana executed its first person in 15 years. So it has been an extremely hot topic, both locally and nationally. Alabama started executions again. Um, the problem that some states ran into with executions, first of all, not all states have the death penalty. Okay. I think I have a little typo here on um, my PowerPoint, and then I have 28 states have crimes punishable by death. And I say the federal government in 27 states allow capital punishment. Obviously, I think that should be 28 there. I think I made a little typo. But there are 60 federal crimes that could lead to the death penalty. So there's a lot of federal ways you can get there, and a lot of it has to do with the the national security type crimes where you have sold information to foreign governments, that kind of thing. But there have been a lot of legal executions over the years. These materials that I'm using now are a few years old, and at that point, there were still over 18,000 legal executions since the 1600s. Um, and, this says the most common method of imposing death is lethal injection. That's absolutely true over the last 50 years, I'm sure. But most recently, we ran into a problem with lethal injections, which means they would, by IV, serve what they usually call a cocktail of drugs, and the person would just drift off and die, right? The drug companies quit providing the drugs. A lot of the drug companies didn't want to have their drugs tied in with executions, and so they quit. And so we couldn't get them. The states couldn't get them to do lethal injections because they couldn't get their hands on the drugs. So, like this guy that they just executed last week, and again, I'm in March of 2025. They did his by having him inhale through a mask pure nitrogen gas. We can't live on nitrogen gas. We have to have oxygen. And so he died that way. Um, Alabama, I think, has done four like that over the last 12 to 14 months. And we supposedly followed Alabama's model, which if you think about it, I don't know if that's always the best, the best thing to do is follow Alabama. But in any event, that is the way it was done to this gentleman. He tried to raise a last minute objection that he's a Buddhist and that that form of um, death was a violation of his Religious Freedom Act because Buddhists believe something about the way you die prohibits you from moving on to the next realm. I don't know anything about the Buddhist faith, and I apologize for that. But that was basically his last argument was tied to religion. And you know, of course, we're not allowed under our Constitution to have cruel and unusual punishment. So the question is that cruel and unusual punishment? I do know there was an execution. I don't remember what state, it was somewhere much more north of us. It was not in the South. Within the last couple of months, who they actually executed their prisoner by firing squad. And of course, we've used to see that right on old movies and stuff, the firing squad. And of course, you put a squad out there because you don't want to know which gun it was that actually killed him. So there's numerous guns out there shooting at him. So no one particular person thinks that they actually killed him. So I don't know about whether it's today the most common method because of that trouble with getting the drugs. The habeas corpus review is basically it's the fact that it's a legal process. It it has the death sentence legal process has many problems. The biggest one and the one that most people are aware of is the long delays. This gentleman that they just executed, I showed you the article on, his case is 30 years old. So it's just, first of all, with a death penalty case, there's an automatic review up to the appeals courts. Like it's not a choice of one side saying, am I going to appeal? There's an automatic appeal. This causes long delays between sentencing and execution. At the time of these materials, the average delay was almost 13 years. My guess is in Louisiana, it's longer than that. That really would be my guess. Um, Now, to counter that, don't we want to have automatic review? I mean, we want more than one court looking at this if we're going to put somebody to death, right? I mean, that's the other argument for we need these delays. We want to make sure we get it right. I know in this article I read, the husband of the victim said it's just it's closure is all it is. You know, it didn't bring her back. It didn't change anything that we've all gone through. His family's gone through it. My family's gone through it. But it's over now. It's done. Now, these long delays raise some really interesting questions. If you have the chance, go back and look at this YouTube video on Tookie Williams or do your own research on Tookie Williams. He was an inmate, I want to say out in California. Bad guy. He was in jail a long time, though, and he did a lot of good things while he was in jail. He rehabilitated, at least that's what it appears. Who knows what's going on in somebody's heart, right? But he appears to have rehabilitated substantially while he was in jail. So 13, and I'm just using 13 because it's there. I think Tookie Williams was in jail even longer than that. Let's take this fella that's in the newspaper that was just killed. He had 30 years. His wife even, said he's not the man he was when he was 18, when he did this crime. He's 30 years older. What has he done in the last 30 years? What if he had gone in and in the last 30 years had done all kind of good things? Tookie Williams wrote children's books. He made speeches. He did all kind of good stuff. Guess what? Now it's time for you to die. And that I'm just giving you the arguments on one side or the other. Do we really want to put somebody to death who apparently has come out the other side and turned into somebody who could go back into society, yet his death sentence is still there, and the appeals may have run out like they had for this gentleman. If you are going to commit a crime, I would not suggest you go do it in China. China has the most executions in the world, actually more than the rest of the world combined. So I think I'd skip China when you pick your when you say I'm not going to do it in the United States. I think I would skip China. In fact, I think I'd skip most other countries completely. But okay, let's talk about the people who are against capital punishment. And there are a lot of people who are, and there are a lot of people who are for it. So all I want to do, I feel like my job is to help you understand the arguments on each side. Every person has to reach their own conclusion, right? Here are some of the factors that are brought up by those who oppose the capital punishment. The biggest one, the most important one, innocent people are executed. Now, we've talked about at the very beginning, hey, is the system perfect? It clearly is not. Are there some innocent people sitting in jail? Absolutely. Are there some guilty people out walking around? Absolutely. So this is somebody who, is innocent, and yet we didn't just put him in jail, we killed him. We should not be doing that. And that's their argument. Um, Second argument, you can't use the death penalty as to say that it deters others from committing the crime. The opponents say there's no evidence at all that proves that somebody else is out there considering murdering someone, and they say, oh, no, I might get the death penalty, I'm not going to do it. There's no proof that that actually it serves as a deterrent. Arbitrariness, remember, let's talk back to the prosecution's discretion, right? Prosecution is making the determination of what charge they're going after. That charge determines whether it's a death penalty case or not. So this DA in this jurisdiction, in this judicial district, he wants to, this one next door, he doesn't. I mean, it's just arbitrary as to when it gets applied and when it doesn't get applied. Is discrimination brought into it again? Is the death penalty applied more to certain races, certain intelligence levels, certain financial backing levels? You know what I mean? There's so many different arguments. Expense is probably one that I don't really understand, because expense, you're looking at most choices on these cases. If it's a murder, is it the death penalty or is it life in prison? Well, I don't see how they can say, the death penalty is too expensive. Well, it's expensive to keep somebody in prison the rest of their life too. So I think that I would, I don't really understand that one too much. But the overall bottom line is that human life is sacred. It is not for us to take away. That's up to God to determine who lives and dies, and not the government. So those are just some of their arguments. Now, there are a lot of people who say, no, it's absolutely justified. Just desserts, remember? An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. You took a life, you lose your life. That's the way it should be. You should pay the ultimate price if you took the ultimate from someone else. And look, if that murderer is locked up, he might get out. If that murderer is dead, we are fully protected, 100% protected. He's not coming back out to murder anybody else. And from the victim's family and friends, it's over. The guy paid the ultimate price for what he did to your loved one. He's not in there anymore. He can't do anything to you anymore or anybody else. He gone. And so that's just some of the arguments for it. Don't ever think that it hasn't been fully litigated and vetted. These are just some of the cases, during just showing you years of cases going up for all different reasons regarding the death penalty, from different states, from the feds. You don't have to know any of these cases. That's not my point. My point is to let you know that this is something that has been given a whole lot of consideration. I want to say it was back in 2005 that in Louisiana, they came back, the U.S. Supreme Court came back and said you cannot use the death penalty on a 17-year-old. I think, if I'm remembering correctly. I mean, there's so many cases that have gone up and it's been considered. So it's not something that, nobody's really given it much thought or litigation. The future of it, these materials were written, if you see down there, I see copyright 2017. At that time, support for the death penalty has been declining since 1994. I think that probably has changed now. I'm guessing at this as well. But I think that the today's political climate is much more tilting back towards lock them up, throw the key away. And I'm just guessing if you see the way deportations are all of a sudden, picking up and being handled and incarcerations for immigration. And I think that the overall tone of the country is much more of a tough on crime right now. And so I think this statement might be in question. I do think that from 1994 forward, there was a lot of leaning away from the death penalty, with the main reason being we just can't execute innocent people. We just can't do it. So this one, I would never test you on this question, first of all, but it won't be on your test as to where the political climate is today. It's just to kind of let the country kind of wanes from one to the other. It seems like it does that. I'm not a history major, and those of you who are interested in history may see it a lot better than I do. But we kind of seem to the pendulum seems to swing back and forth, and it seems to me that we're swinging much more in a tough on crime kind of atmosphere now. Okay, that's it for chapter 6. You do have some chapter 6 review questions to do. So do those. That's the only assignment for this week. Next week, we will move on to chapter 7, and I'll have one more discussion board for you where I actually interview the assistant warden. A lot of you may know him, but he did an interview for me a while back. And we'll do one more discussion board there. But this week, just chapter 6. I'm going to tell you we are rounding the last turn and almost headed to the stretch where this is week 11. Your final exam is in week 16. So we've got a couple of more chapters to do. And then you got one more test, regular test. I'll try to save a week in there to kind of give you a final review. If anybody wants to, you know, watch me go over some of the material that'll be on the final. And then you'll have your final exam and you knocked it out. So keep hanging. It's hard. I know you're going to get spring fever with this beautiful weather, but just stick with me. We got a few more weeks. Please email me if you have any questions about anything.